Hello again, everyone. In this video, I want to talk a little bit about actually prototyping your games. A prototype is just like a mock-up of the final version. And this is really good for playtesting, but it's also really good to get a visual idea of what you imagine your final game can look like. So there's a few different ways to do this. The first is by using pen and paper and reusing components from other games. There is nothing wrong with this, and it's a really great way to get the tactile experience of playing a game together. So here you can see that these folks are using just sheets of paper with pen on them. They have some Lego pieces. They have some dice from another game, and they've pulled these things together to create a prototype of this game. Next is digital. There's all kinds of digital tools out there for prototyping your games. One option is dedicated digital game spaces. So you might look at websites like Tabletopia, Tabletop Simulator, or others. I'm sure there's a million out there. Another thing you can think about, though, is other collaborative digital environments. So we are going to look at a tool today called Figma. But you also might think about digital whiteboards. You have access to Microsoft whiteboards through the Microsoft suite that comes with your email. You can look at Miro. You can look at Google Jamboard. Any place where you can get multiple people together playing on a screen in the same place. And in those digital environments, we talked about icons. So if you're looking for some places to get icons, there's some links here where you can go to grab those materials so you don't have to draw them yourself. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about Figma and what it is. So this is Figma's website. It's actually a tool that's meant for app prototyping or website prototyping, but we are going to use it because we can use it for free, and it has a lot of the same tools that you might find in the Adobe suite, so places like Photoshop or Illustrator. It also lets you work together, and so it's great for classroom exercises, and you can even use it for things like digital playtesting. So when you land in Figma, there's a few different tabs and things going on. So real quick, I'll talk about navigating files in here. If you have signed up for the first year seminar team correctly, you will be able to see over here in your team, you have drafts. These will be files if you create them that just you can see. And then you'll have projects, and anything in the projects tab are things that everybody can see. So this is where you'll find the exercise for today. I'm just going to create a new design file draft so that we can poke around and get to know the controls in here. So real quick, the first thing that I suggest, and you don't have to do this, I find it much more convenient, is one, to use a mouse. And then in your preferences, I suggest turning on using the scroll wheel to zoom, and then using right click to drag and pan. So if I turn both of those on, you can see my key visualizations down here. I'm just going to throw something on the screen so that we can have a sense of scale. How to move around the page here is now we can use our scroll wheel to zoom in and zoom out. If you're using a touchpad, you can pinch to zoom, or if you are on a Windows machine, you can hold Control and plus to zoom in, Control and minus to zoom out. Same on the Mac, you're just going to use Command. To move around the page, you can either grab the hand tool here and click and drag, but if you turn that option on to use the right click to pan, you can hold down your right mouse button and click to drag around the page. The middle button on the scroll wheel also works, or if you are on a touchpad, You can tap it and drag with 2 or 3 fingers, depending on if you're on a Mac or a Windows. So that's how we get around here. To actually select stuff, you'll need to use the Move tool. So this is oftentimes the tool that you will have on by default. And you'll see now if I have a couple different things on the screen, and we'll talk about how to make those in a second. With the Select tool, I can grab these things and I can move them around the page. If you ever can't click on something, oftentimes that's because you have another tool selected and you forgot to switch back to the Selection tool. But how do we actually get stuff on the page? That's a good question. So there's a few different tools here for drawing and creating text. The first is the Frame tool, and this is kind of like creating a piece of paper or an artboard. By default, it has a background, and then we can create objects on top of it, be it text or shapes. And you'll see over here in the Layers panel, which is just below your toolbar, those things automatically get grouped into the frame. So you can see how they're kind of indented here, and then if I click this arrow, they fold back up. And then if I move the frame, everything moves with it. To make basic shapes, you have some tools over here, starting with the rectangle tool. You click that, you'll create a rectangle when you click and drag. And if you click the arrow, you'll get a few other shapes that you can make. So I'm going to make a rectangle here, and then we'll talk about how to change how it looks. So I'm holding down my left mouse button, and you can click and drag and make this in any size you want. Let me zoom in so you can see it a little easier. But if you hold Shift, you will constrain the proportions of the thing that you are creating, and you see how it scales equally to make a perfect square. Over here on the right, you have your Properties panel, and this shows you details about whatever it is that you have selected. So right now we have our square selected. It shows you the X and Y coordinates. You have the width and the height of it. And then down here, which you might use quite a bit, you have options for what this thing looks like. So here it says fill. You see this D9 hex code. Here we can change the color of what our square looks like. And we could even add a stroke to it, which is the line going around the outside. So if I click plus here, I will get a black stroke by default. Maybe I want to make that blue. And then if I want to make it larger, you have these 3 lines here increasing in thickness. That increases the weight of your strokes. What we are going to be working with a lot today is the text tool, and so we're going to move into that next. So I'm going to grab my selection tool, I'm going to delete my square here, and then we're going to grab our text tool, and I'll click and drag to make a text frame. And then if I type, that text goes in the text box, and then I'll need to grab my selection tool and click out of it to deselect it. Again, if I select it, I'll get information on the thing I have selected. So right now that is the text. And the properties over here change from when we had the square. Now we have this section called text. And here we get our text properties. So right below where it says enter, this is actually the font that is used. So we could change this to made in orange. And you can see that the font has changed. Change that back to enter. Now, to make this text larger, you'll notice that scaling the text box doesn't help, because actually what we're doing is changing the size of the text box. So we could increase the point size of the text over here, right next to the weight. And then we could change how bold or how light this is by clicking on the drop down next to regular. Could make it super thin, or we could make it extra bold or even black. Just like our square, we can change the color over here. So maybe we want our text to be red. And then anytime you're inside your text box, it functions as you would expect. So if you hit enter, you'll make a paragraph break. Sometimes you need to deselect, grab it and move it around, and increase the size of your text box so that it fits whatever you want it to. And then if you double click, you'll usually enter back into that text mode. But if you ever have trouble, you can always grab the type tool and then click inside. So you'll see my cursor pops up there. So maybe I want to make this text much smaller. All I had to do was select this and then alter the size. If I select this text again, you'll see this is much larger. When you're working with text, sometimes it's helpful to break up your text boxes instead of having these as two separate paragraphs. Maybe I want to create a whole new text box for that smaller text. So let's make this smaller again. It's still pretty big. Let's go down to, say, 13. So now when I have my selection tool, I can kind of click and drag and move these things around. Oops, this is a little too big. You can see where the text box here is overlapping this. I'm just going to shrink that down so I can easily click between them. And then if you ever have trouble selecting something, you can always grab the layer from over here in the Layers panel. So that's how to work with text. Those are kind of the basics of working around in Figma. And from here, let's jump over to the actual exercise.